Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mike Ward, and I want to talk to you today about a deep dive on ServiceNow and Microsoft's M365 email integration. There's a ton of different ways to do it. I want to go through what they are, how to do them, and actually show you the behind the scenes, because a lot of times customers don't necessarily know what to do on the M365 side of things, and the ServiceNow people only know the ServiceNow side of things. So I want to show both sides of this. So let's jump in. As I said, hi, I'm Mike. Very nice to be with you today. I am the Director of Architecture at foreverhuman.ai. We're a boutique ServiceNow partner. All we do is ServiceNow. We do it very well. I like to say we're the ServiceNow team you wish you had. But let's get on with the show. So there's really three ways that I want to talk about connecting ServiceNow to M365 email today. There's basic authentication, which is very much considered legacy. I don't recommend that anyone does it. It's already been deprecated from the Microsoft side for IMAP and POP3. SMTP still works, but it's being turned off in December 2026. So don't recommend that. There's also using SMTP or IMAP over OAuth. So this is fundamentally those same protocols, but wrapped in the OAuth authentication scheme. That's kind of a decent way to do it. It's the way that a lot of folks do it. It's kind of the default for today. You use tokens to secure it. It's much more secure than basic auth. But there's a new boy in town. This Graph API wrapped again around OAuth allows you to do all of this just over REST calls and HTTPS and port 443 and all this kind of lovely stuff. So I'm going to jump into all those three things. First off, not much time spent on basic authentication. They removed basic auth for IMAP and POP3 in 2022, which was a long time ago. But you still can do it. Needs a licensed mailbox. There's no App Reg. It's just you put the credentials in. It's the simplest way, but it's really not secure and it's mostly deprecated. So let's just call it bad and move right along. You can do this SMTP for sending or IMAP for receiving over OAuth 2.0. This is a totally decent way to do it. You need a bunch of delegated scopes. You need some plugins activated. I'll show you those plugins. You create an OAuth application registry. You create an app registration in Entra. You give it a bunch of scopes. You map those things up. In ServiceNow, you get a token, you get permissions, and you can send these things through. There's a lot of moving parts for it. You generally use a service account in Entra that has access to read, let's say, a shared mailbox. You can use one service account for multiple mailboxes. That's kind of nice. Sometimes you want to have like 4 email addresses all ingest into ServiceNow. Totally fine. But that service account needs to be licensed, and you need to be able to log into M365 with it. So that works well. A couple downsides, there's an extra license, but also you're fundamentally still using these IMAP and SMTP protocols, and some people want to move away from those because they're kind of considered legacy-ish at this point, or at least they're being deprecated and moved away from softly in favor of the Graph APIs. So I'll still walk through how to actually do that, but the Graph APIs, you've been able to receive email over Graph for a while in ServiceNow, but they only introduced support for sending it in Australia. So you need to be on the Australia release to be able to send via the Graph API. There's an app registration, but no special permissions, actually. There's a couple ways to do this, which I'll talk through. But in the best way, you don't need any special permissions on the app registration, which is kind of cool. You just connect it to some backend ExchangeOnline permissions, and then you can send and receive these ways. So no SMTP, no IMAP, very limited authentication. It's all just REST calls. The extra advantage is you can see those REST calls in the ServiceNow outbound HTTP logs, which is kind of nice. So that's the main kind of pro and con. This is the more modern one, but you have to be on Australia, and it's a little bit more complicated to set up, which is exactly why I want to show you. But first, I'm going to start by setting up the SMTP and IMAP versions over OAuth 2.0. Let's go do both the ServiceNow side and the Entra side. So I've got just a relatively clean ServiceNow instance. I've got an Entra instance here, portal.azure.com. I'm a full admin. Now, a lot of folks won't have full access to do everything that I'm doing here. The point of me showing you is that I want you to be able to instruct an Entra administrator on what to do during their implementation. That's quite valuable. So for the IMAP and SMTP side, we're going to use a totally new registration. You can do them both on one registration. You need to kind of get a little bit fancy with profiles, but for now I'm going to have a separate registration for the older version, IMAP and SMTP, versus the App Reg. So this is, ServiceNow email, IMAP and SMTP over OAuth. And then you need to give it a redirect URI. So that's, web is in use there. I'm going to pull up my page of notes. And this should just be the instance URL with /OAuth redirect.do. Right, easy peasy. Register that up. And then you've got some IDs here, which you will need. You will need this application client ID. So please copy that. You will also need the token. We'll need to create a token via certificates and secrets, and we'll need to give it some API permissions. For now, I'm just going to create a new client secret. Most customers just allow this to be 24 months. It's up to you how long you want it to be expired in. I'm going to do this description, ServiceNow email secret. Hit add. Generates one. The only thing you need here is the value here. You can hit this nice little copy button, copy that up. I'm gonna stash this in my notepad. And then from here, so we've got all that, but you do need to give it some API permissions as well. Now, there's a nice article here on exactly which API permissions you need to give to. I will give people access to this link. There's a ServiceNow knowledge base article on it. But I'll give you the hint of exactly what you need as well. So in this article, this kind of walks you through, and these are the permissions that you need. So imap.accessuser.all, smtp.send, and offline access. So we're going to add those 3 extra permissions in here. Click add, go to Microsoft Graph, and then these are going to be delegated permissions. So in this version, we're logging with a service account. So we're going to delegate the permission to the service accounts session. That's kind of how delegated permissions work in OAuth. So I'm going to give it the access as user all permission. I'm going to tick that. The other one was smtp.send. Going to tick that. And the last one was offline access. So all 3 of those added these permissions. You should have 4 total. And then we do need to give them admin consent as well. So granted. I've got that. I've got a secret here. You can't see it anymore, so make sure you copy it the first time. And then I've got that all set up. So let's come over into ServiceNow and set up the ServiceNow side of the house for this. So first thing we need is a new application registry for the OAuth side of things. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to hit New. And then I'm going to say connect to a third-party OAuth provider outbound. I'm not going to do the simplified one. I want all the power. So here, the name can be, M365 email, SMTP, IMAP over OAuth. And then the client ID here is going to be the client ID that we grabbed at the top of this. Application client ID, that. The secret, the client secret, is going to be the client secret from the certificate and secret here, that. Exactly, you got those. The default grant type, now up here doesn't actually matter, it matters a little bit lower, but still we want to say authorization code. This is saying I want to log in as a user. And then for these authorization URLs, you can get those by going to Overview and then Endpoints. And we want to look at the OAuth 2.0 authorization endpoint v2. So that's the first endpoint for authorization URL. And then for token URL is right below it, this one here. I'm just leveraging those little copy buttons. And then that's it for the first side of things. I'm going to save this I'm not in an update set. Forgive me, you'd probably want to do this in an update set, but I generally, honestly, just hand configure this in every instance. That creates this nice little OAuth entity profile here, named whatever you put in the name, and then default underscore profile. Grant type authorization code, perfect. What we need to do from here is we need to create a few OAuth entity scopes which match the permissions that we gave it here. Mostly match them. We don't need user.read. But the other three we do. So I'm going to add, and we need to add them with mostly this extra little tag here. We don't need the quotes, but we do need the https outlook.office.com part. So I'm going to insert a row with, making sure I don't have my quotes. And then, so give it a name, give it an OAuth scope. And there we go. And then for the second one, exact same thing. This is smtp.send. So, and then the third one is offline access. And this creates 3 new records associated to this kind of OAuth application registry here. And then we need to go into the OAuth entity profile and associate these to the profile. So here, there's none associated here, but you need to get the right ones. So I use this magnifying glass and then just make sure that you get ones under the OAuth profile that you talked about. So if I should be able to go here. This is the OAuth provider I talked about. So access is user all, add that one. SMTP should be it, but again, let's use the magnifying glass to properly get SMTP, that one, and then get similarly offline access. So this, they all have offline access, so we want the one from the OAuth. There we go. Those 3, update that one. There we go. We've got a profile with 3 scopes. The 3 scopes are associated. That should be it for the OAuth application registry part of things. Now we can go and set up the email account. My little trick is typing LBO, which matches system mailboxes, and then you just get all the email related stuff. So we're going to email accounts. That you see the 2 for ServiceNow. These are the 2 that come in every instance. We're going to make a new one. And what we're going to do is first we're going to say, M365 email IMAP over OAuth. Lovely. This type is going to be IMAP, and the authentication is going to be OAuth. Imagine that. On the server side of the fence, this article tells you, but you just kind of need to know that that's the server, outlook.office365.com. For the username, you're going to put the email address of the mailbox you want to use. Now, this is the first time you're seeing it. I've set this one up at our Forever Human domain, but whatever the generally like shared mailbox or something that you want to use is, and then you're going to point the OAuth profile at the new one that you've made. So this was this one. It'll be the default profile, actually. And this is where the profiles, if I go back to my OAuth side, these profiles will store which scopes are associated to it. So if you wanted to have one app registration on the Entra side that supported both SMTP and Graph, you actually can't do both in the same profile, but you can have 2 profiles here associated to the same application registry, one with the Graph scope and one with the SMTP and IMAP scope. So that's how that works. And then here, the connection security, again, you just kind of need to know or follow the article that it's SSL/TLS and 993 for IMAP. It is different for SMTP. So save this up. Now, this should work because I've preset some stuff on the mailbox side. I do want you to be aware. So this is the demo mailbox that I have. This is in the Exchange admin console, which you, again, probably won't have access to. But under delegation, we need send as, that's needed for SMTP, and read and manage full access, that's needed for the actual reading over IMAP. The other thing that's important is that the mailbox needs to be IMAP enabled and SMTP authentication enabled. When I get into PowerShell, I'll show you a couple of commands that you can run to double check that. But those are two things that need to be triggered. If either of those isn't set, it might be giving you an authentication error. So from here, once you're done, you can just hit authorize email account access because there's no token yet. Now, generally, you always want to do this over in an incognito browser. So the reason why is it's gonna prompt you to log into Entra. And if you're already logged into Entra, it'll use whatever account you're logged in as. Generally, that's not the service account with access to the shared mailbox. So the solution there is you open an incognito window, log into your instance locally with login.do with some admin account, come here, hit that button. It opens up a new Entra login, and you log in with the service account, and then it fetches the tokens for the service account. Now, once you've done that, it just uses the access token for like 24 hours, and then it uses the refresh token to re-get it. So it'll stay for a long time until probably the secret expires. But you only need to do that once, but you do need to log in with the service account. For me, I'm just going to hit this button normally because my Entra account is the service account in this case. So it's going to pop up. It's going to log me into Entra. Hooray, I got an OAuth token. And now we do a connection test and we cross our fingers that this thing worked. Connection successful. Amazing. So we have now set up IMAP over OAuth. I'm going to hit save. I'm even going to activate it because we've done our first of 4 scenarios. I'm going to go do SMTP over OAuth next. So copy this, go new, let's say SMTP over OAuth. The type is SMTP, authentication is OAuth. The Microsoft would tell you to use a different server. I just use this server. It works quite well. So the email user label, this is what would be showing as like the from display name of the user that you use. The username here, this needs to be the user ID of the service account. So it's going to log in with this account, and then it's going to send the email from this account. So, the same shared mailbox that you used in the IMAP one's probably good to use here. And then on the OAuth profile, it's probably pre-selected as a recent selection, your OAuth profile. And the connection security here on SMTP is not SSL, it's start TLS, and the port is 587. Save that up. Again, no OAuth token, but if I hit authorize, it should get an OAuth token. Amazing, it did. We do our test connection. We cross our fingers. Connection successful. Amazing. Perfect. Okay. So we have now set up both IMAP and SMTP over OAuth. Those will work to our shared mailbox just fine. Now, let's dive into the graph side of things, which is a little bit more complicated, requires some PowerShell, but quite cool to actually go. So back into here, I've got these app registrations, and what I actually did is I pre-created this app registration for Graph API over OAuth because I needed to get some IDs first. There's a trick. The IDs that you need a client ID and an object ID, but they are not the ones on the app registration. They are the client ID on the enterprise app. So if I go to this enterprise app for Graph API over OAuth, this is the application ID and object ID that I need to put into a bunch of commands. Now, the commands are very specific. You'll see them here. I'll put them in the description of this YouTube video so that you have the exact commands. But we're going to use these IDs, not the ones on the app registration. However, that said, the ones on the app registration here are the ones that we need to put in the OAuth record in ServiceNow. So you need both sets kind of. So I have an app registration. Literally all I did when I set it up was to give it this exact same redirect URI for my instance. And then I didn't really do anything else with it. So this is the app registration. Yeah. no API permissions other than user.read. It came with user.read by default. I didn't give it to it. That's totally cool. I do need a token, sorry, a secret, just like I did in the other side. You know, we can say 3 months, call this a graph email token. Create this, cool. And then save it in an notepad. And the overview, this one we'll need for the OAuth. But those other ones from the app, enterprise app, I've already saved. So here, this should be all we need for the Entra side of things. But now we need to get into some cool stuff in PowerShell. So first I'm going to open PowerShell. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect up to ExchangeOnline. So I'm going to say Connect-ExchangeOnline. It's going to prompt me to authenticate. I've got my, powerful account here. Close that tab. Back in here, great. I'm now connected to ExchangeOnline. So first, I wanted to kind of give you a couple of commands for looking at what the properties of that mailbox are that we just used for SMTP. So hey, look, it's right here. Get cast mailbox and then dash identity. The before the @ sign part of the email, you can use the @ sign if you want to, and then you can really just kind of show all of those properties. And it'll say whether IMAP is enabled, you want that to be true, and whether SMTP client authentication is disabled, you want that to be false. If you're getting errors on your IMAP or your SMTP calls, you could ask the Exchange admin or whoever you're working on with on that side to look at this exact call and do they have the IMAP enabled true, SMTP client auth disabled false. That's the version you want. Okay, so now we're going to set up the graph permissions. The way we're going to do this is we're going to make something called a service principal. Then we're going to create a scope associated to it, and then we're going to assign some permissions to it. That service principal is associated to the enterprise app that we got the IDs from, and it will also be associated to, or the scope specifically that we tie the permissions to will be associated to the mailbox that we're dealing with here. So that means this service principal gives this app registration / enterprise app the ability to do things to the shared mailbox directly. And that's all we need. There's no service account. You don't need a licensed account, so you can save on licenses there. It doesn't have access to anything else. This is kind of the good way of doing this. I will explain briefly a different way when we get to the end, but this is the more secure way. It requires this PowerShell access, but it's nice if you can walk someone through it. So the first step that we need to do is, we're in our ExchangeOnline console. We need to create a new service principal. The command for this is you give, say, new service principal with an app ID. That's the app ID from the enterprise app, and the object ID from the enterprise app, and then just give it a little display name, like, ServiceNow email integration. Great. So I've got a service principal. That's fantastic. Next thing I need to do is create a new management scope associated with it. So New-ManagementScope -name. You just name the scope. It can be whatever you want. It should be in quotes. And then this is where you specify the email address that the scope is attached to. So I'm going to attach it to my email address. You could do multiple email addresses if you want. I'll leave the graph, specifically the PowerShell syntax up to you, but you totally could. In this case, I'm just going to attach it to this one mailbox. And then I need to assign some management roles to the app with this custom scope that I made, which is attached to the mailbox, and that's the role. So, role assignment, I'm naming it ServiceNow-mail.write. I'm giving it the app ID of the app up here, the object ID there. And then the role of application mail.read-write. So that's the one that lets you read a mailbox. And I've set it in the scope of this ServiceNow email demo, which ties it to the mailbox. And then I'm going to do that exact thing again for the mail.send role. Cool. I've now given mail.send and mail.read-write to this app and this mailbox. And then I want to do a little test. So there's a cool test that you can do, and extra important for replication reasons, but essentially test service principal authorization. You give it the identity of the object ID, and then the resource of the mailbox you want to test. And just, these are the only things that I wanted out of it. So the role name and whether it's in scope. Yes, it is in scope for those things. Fantastic. I also want to test that it's not in scope for other email addresses because I don't want this application registration to be able to do anything else. So I'm just going to say, hey, can this app registration access my mailbox? No, it cannot access my mailbox. That's good. That's what I want. So at this point, if this test service principal authorization works, then you're probably going to be good on the graph permissions. The reason why I say probably is the replication on this to when you'll actually get a successful test out of it is annoyingly long. It's like, could be 30 minutes, could be 60 minutes, could be upwards of 2 hours. And I heard that if you keep poking it, it can like extend it. So I'll hit the test connection button. I expect to not get a successful connection. I also trust, and I've done this a bunch of times, that it will clear up in about an hour, let's say, and then you'll get the connection and all will be tickety-boo. This is only related to setting up the service principal thing. Once that's done, all the rest of it doesn't really have a replication delay associated to it. But once you've gotten the test service principal authorization, you're probably good. That's the vital step here because that's what actually does the permissions. And back here in my graph API over OAuth, I can even refresh this. It hasn't added any permissions to this. There's no API permissions still. There's just the secret. So it's a very low permissioned app, which is quite nice. The other way that you can do this, there is another way that you can do the permissioning, is using something called an exchange access policy. So you can give this graph API a whole bunch of really broad permissions, like you can give it the SMTP.send permission, and I think you give it like mail.read-write on the application, which actually gives it permission to read and send from every single user's mailbox in your entire domain. And then in exchange, you can scope that down to say, no, this app can't do all of that. It can only do it for these mailboxes. But that's like opening it up really broad and then narrowing it down. That's fundamentally more risky. And it's not really needed if you have this service principal. This is called the RBAC method. And I strongly prefer it. So do that, especially you can test it here. Yes, there's a little replication delay, but I've had very strong results with just, doing this. And once the test passes, you'll be good after the replication delay. So I've done all of the Exchange Online permissioning of this. Now we need to set up the ServiceNow OAuth side and then the ServiceNow mailboxes. So I'm going to come back into my instance. I'm going to go to OAuth, application registry, and I might as well now show you a couple plugins that are needed here. So there are 2 plugins, one for the OAuth support of IMAP and SMTP. That's this one, com.glide.email.oauth. And then the second one, if you're actually using the Graph API, which is com.glide.email.graph. And that's the one that in the Australia version, it supports both outbound and inbound. In Zurich and previous, it only supports inbound receiving. But those 2 plugins are very necessary. Okay, application registry. So I've got my one here for SMTP and IMAP. As I said, I could add a second profile and some scopes to that, but in this case, I'm just adding a second one. So connect to a third-party OAuth provider. Fantastic. This is M365 graph email. The client ID is the client ID from here. This is the app registration record. The client secret is the client secret that we got earlier, which I did write down. I'm just going to generate myself a new secret. Nuke that one. New secret. API. Bam. There's my client secret. In this case, the default grant type is client credentials, not authorization code, because there is no service account in this case. Similarly, the authorization URLs are up here in overview endpoints. It's the same too as before. And this is just your domain, your tenant ID there in the middle. So give it an authorization URL, give it a token URL. You want the V2 ones. And then we've got client credentials. We can save this up. Just like before, it generates a default profile. We need to create a scope. In this case, there's only one scope, and it's very simple. It's just literally .default. The OAuth scope .default. Do that, save it. You do still need to associate that scope to this profile. So here, use my little magnifying glass. .default M365 graph email. That's the one. Update that. Our OAuth looks good. Client credentials, client ID secret, all this kind of good stuff. Now we can go back here into this email accounts and we can make a new inbound graph. So this is M365 graph inbound. Type Microsoft graph receive. These two things are there from that last graph plugin. You don't need to even give it a server. It just knows how to talk to M365. It gets a lot of stuff from the OAuth profile. The inbox address, that's, yes, you guessed it, the address that we want to receive email from. And here we don't want this M365 one. We want the new M365 graph email default profile. Save that up. We don't have a token. I should be able to get a token. So again, because this is client credentials, there's no service account. You don't need to worry about incognito or logging in or whatever. It's just using the client ID and client secret to go to M365 and get a token. You can, so we're using a client ID and client secret. There's an option to use a certificate for this too. I'm not going to demo that today, but if you want to use a certificate instead, you can totally do that. If I hit authorize, it'll retrieve a token. It got that token successfully. I'm going to hit test connection and I expect it to fail. I'll probably come back later to show you it succeed, but I wanted to demonstrate. Oh, connection successful. Amazing. Okay, so that one worked already. The replication delay was in my favor. So we've got graph inbound. Let's do graph outbound. And 365 graph outbound. Type graph send. Similarly, no server or anything here. The email user label, as before, you know, what's going to show up as the from email address. What's the actual address you're sending from? And then here we can just choose graph email again. Save. This is a separate token. So again, authorize the email account. It'll go get that token. Try this connection test too. I might be lucky on replication. Connection successful. Amazing. 4 for 4. So we now have 4 email accounts. I won't demo them actually seeing them on the inbound and outbound. You can still get some permissions error even though these connection tests work. But from here, it's pretty minor, and we'll go into troubleshooting steps here. So we've done SMTP and IMAP. We've done the Graph API. I talked through these two. The best option for permissions is the ExchangeOnline Powershell setting up the service principal, or you can do using the Exchange Access policy to restrict it by giving it larger permissions. I strongly prefer the RBAC method. It's the more modern one. It's the one Microsoft recommends anyways. So here, troubleshooting. These integrations do require troubleshooting. There's a lot of stuff to get right. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, and it can be quite a pain because the ServiceNow logging on it pretty much just says connection error, and the error doesn't really give you a lot of details. So first, especially for the service principal, allow replication time. That can easily get you. Copy paste errors. The best of us are nailed by copy paste errors. I've done it. I troubleshooted for 30 minutes and there was a space at the beginning of one of my email addresses. Double check that stuff. Double check all of the, anything copy paste, anything you're typing in, the scopes. I've been nabbed because I forgot the HTTPS outlook.office.com at the beginning of my scopes in ServiceNow. They're not in Entra, but they're in ServiceNow. Double check that both IMAP and SMTP are enabled. I gave you that little PowerShell command to do it. That will check if those things are enabled. If those aren't, that can give you the denial. And similarly, does the service account have access to both full control and send as? That's these things, right? Are you set up here on that properly? So if all of those things hit and you're done all of it, Ideally, these emails should work, and it's very satisfying to actually have this work. Not only do you get to use the email addresses you wanted, Microsoft handles all the DKIM and email security and SPF checking, and it gets validated as internal addresses, and you can receive from 5 or 7 or 10, however, different email inboxes to all ingest into ServiceNow and write your automation rules and your assignments based off of that. So it's quite nice once you get all this going. It is quite a bit, but I'm sure after all of this and with all of the links and the commands that I've given you, you can do this all yourself. So with that, thank you for the time you spent and have a wonderful day.